I mean, when was the last time you read a COVID sign? You just don't read them anymore. Just walk straight past them. Doesn't matter where you hang them on the back of the toilet door, people have stopped reading them. And so for me, I'd say ditch that. Get a piece of butcher's paper. It's cheap as chips. Get some blue tack. Write in the middle of it what you think is important to you, which is be honest, don't make stuff up. People die when you do that. Write that in the middle of the piece of paper. And then on a post-it note, get every single team member to write down how that manifests. So you can't Google that. I don't care. Like, you want to write honesty, fine, but you Google honesty. Any monkey can do that. I don't need a Google definition of honesty. I want to know what honesty means to you as the farm owner, as the farm hand. And what's an example of honesty from last week? Write on a post-it note. And if it's got spelling errors in it, it's even better because you wrote it. And now what I can do is I can sit down with you and say, how are we going? Are we winning or losing? Let's grab the butcher's paper, put it on the table. Let's go through these post-it notes and say, let's think of some prime examples. And I always think as a leader, it's important if anyone's going to fall on their sword, it's got to be you.
Welcome to the Profitable Farmer podcast, where we share stories and tips to help you run a better farming business and create your very own freedom farm. If you're looking to work smarter and not harder in your farm business, welcome. You're in the right place. G'day and welcome to Profitable Farmer. I hope you're well, and I hope that this summer is starting to turn for you and you're setting up for a good new season. In this interview, I'm delighted to introduce Paul Ainsworth to you. Paul is the founding principal of the Lincoln Institute for Veterinary Practices. They have pioneered and lead leadership training for vet practices globally, and they are world-class in this whole construct of team management and leadership. Paul is the founding principal of the Lincoln Institute and has a long career in senior management and leadership. He is a graduate of the Australian Defence Force Academy, the University of New South Wales, Royal Military College Duntroon, and was awarded the prestigious Sasakawa Leadership Scholarship by the Australian Graduate School of Management Executive MBA program. Paul's career began as an infantryman in the Army, where he saw international service in 5 foreign countries, culminating in international service as a military observer in the Middle East. On resigning his commission, he was appointed as the inaugural director of Aldi Foods in Australia. His appointment as the nation's first director ensured his place in establishing the workplace culture of one of the world's largest food retailers during its entry into the Australian market. Paul has served as the CEO and board chairman of Australia's fastest growing companies after an approach by the board to lead a substantial change and offshore expansion. His capacity to lead this change in the highly competitive and complex energy sector is testimony to his ability to walk the leadership talk. Paul spends his spare time with family and friends, enjoying the many riches of remote Australia and overseas. Our team at FOA has been moving through the Emerging Leaders program offered by the Lincoln Institute in this last 12 months. We as a team now of 28 plus are getting immense value from that leadership training. And we're delighted to have had over the last 3 or 4 years, the Lincoln Institute attend our conferences on leadership and be our resident specialists in the Platinum Mastermind and alumni programs on this critical topic of leadership. We're delighted to announce to our Platinum Mastermind members and our alumni members that you have exclusive access to the Emerging Leaders program through your Platinum Mastermind and alumni memberships. More on that internally, team. But it gives me great pleasure to connect with and introduce Paul Ainsworth to the Profitable Farmer community. G'day, Paul. Welcome.
Hey, Hutch. How are you?
Really well, thanks. Great to see you, and thanks for your time. Would you mind just giving us an overview of the Lincoln Institute and how it came to be?
Sure. Yeah. So Lincoln, I guess around about 14, 15 years ago, I was working down in Melbourne doing something completely different. And one of my employees played squash with a veterinarian who needed to, he was convening this same guy was convening a conference of vets, and their keynote speaker had fallen over. So this guy dobbed me in for the presentation, figured I could talk about some army stuff and make up some stories and keep people entertained for a while. Went into a room full of people that most of whom I'd now call friends. I'm still in touch with, I think, the vast majority of those people. I did ask them how I was able to add value to the presentation beforehand, the convener. And he said, oh, look, veterinarians generally don't have much contact with or contact hours in terms of leading people or understanding how to lead people or education in that area. With 15 years in the army, maybe you can share some of your insights. And that was really what I did. I said that for a couple of hours, and I really just ran it as a Q&A. And at the end of it, they said, could I keep working with them? And I kind of just looked at them incredulously and said, doing what? And they said, just teach us that stuff that you've just been talking about. So I said, okay, well, there's no such thing as a weekend warrior here. You're not doing this on the weekend. I can't do it in 2 days, which is what they kind of, these mastermind groups will get together every couple of days. And so a bit like the way you run farm owners, it's a long process. It takes time to kind of embed. And so, so we that's how Lincoln started. Came up with a name, thought Lincoln sounded good. Lincoln School sounded awful. Lincoln Academy was even worse. And lincolninstitute.com.au was available. So it wasn't particularly sophisticated. There were no marketing companies involved. So yeah, that's how Lincoln came about. And it's been going now since 2011, I think. And I've got proud to say that 3 of the people in that room are now co-directors of Lincoln. 2 of them work actively in the business, Gary and Mick. So yeah, we've been friends ever since.
So 15 years on, what does the team look like, and what impact do you see Lincoln Institute having on the vet sector?
Well, so the first part of that question is, what does the team look like? We don't have an office anywhere. Haven't had one since we started. We don't really need one. Everyone works from home. So we kind of didn't really skip a beat with COVID, except a lot of our programs, the sort of very keen as a train the trainer in the military. I kind of had I suppose a set view on how people learn things, and particularly how adults learn things. And so the course structure was such that we come together every 6 months, learn some new things, then go away for 5 months, do some more coaching, then come back for another couple of days, learn some more things. And that's all structured, and depending on which course we're on. So we don't really need an office because we use hotels, and event spaces. I've never actually counted how many people we have on the team. I think we have, I don't know, maybe a dozen full-time now. And we have about a dozen coaches. Coaches are all graduates of our programs, and they kind of keep that learning process going through the 5 months within a semester of training. And so that's kind of how we structure it. And what was the second part of your question, Hutch?
What impact do you see your team having on the vet sector?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, because in the early days, I sort of, when sort of formulating the business, I did a sort of a problem analysis. And I think if ever you're going to focus on anything, you got to work out what problem you're going to solve. Otherwise, you're just, wasting your time solving the wrong issues. So I sort of dived into what are the issues facing the veterinary sector. And one of the ones that really stood out for me was a lack of, or well, not necessarily lack of, but a real craving for a sense of community. I would imagine that's the same with farm owners. You've got people who are working really isolated locations. They love to come together for a conference. It always completely bemused me what they were coming to a conference for, until I really understood this sense of getting together. And I've always been a huge fan of collective resilience. I don't think people turn up to work match fit. I really don't. They never did in the army. They weren't fighting for the flag or the anthem. They were fighting for their mate. And so the more collegiality you can build in a small community, whether that be a section in the infantry or, a community of farmers or a community of veterinarians. So all of I would say that's the biggest impact we have, is that they're coming together to learn some stuff that they don't know. They're clinically very good at what they do, but they don't really understand the skills that are associated with how you have a confident conversation with somebody, or why somebody might be a pain in the neck to you and not to someone else, and what's going on there. So how you hold somebody accountable. So there's sort of an upskilling impact that we have, but then there's the embedding. I always think there's a big transition between learning a new skill and actually being able to apply it. And that transition process means that people need to get uncomfortable. You don't learn anything in your comfort zone. You got to push yourself outside your comfort zone. So you sort of learn all the bits and pieces that go with having a really confident conversation with someone, including getting your own headspace right, and then setting that conversation up for success so a person doesn't become defensive. There's a skills component to that, but then on the application side, you just got to have a crack at it. And then it'll probably won't work the first time you do it. And then you then start to develop those skills. So community was the first one. All our training's done in teams. As you know, we've worked for years with farm owners, and I just love when they come into that room at farm owners, you have nailed it, because the sense of community in that environment and the way you make everyone feel is actually quite extraordinary. Even though there's such a large number of people coming together, I've never actually experienced anything like that. So community, upskilling, then the application of the skills. So I didn't want to work with big corporates, teaching leadership. You got some middle manager rocks up, and this isn't, I mean, any offense to any corporates, but they're told to go. They turn up, they kind of listen, but then they go back to their day job. Their boss is a pain in the neck. So, they're kind of being taught all the wrong lessons. And I'm a big fan of the fish rots from the head. So you got to start at the top, which is how our programs operate. And then you distill it down through the rest of the team. And so that team-based learning means that they're learning as much from us as they are from other people in the room. Like, we'll toss an idea around and say, well, let's put this into context, shall we? How does this apply on a farm? Or how does this apply in a veterinary practice? So I've never been a vet. I didn't even know what a vet did when I started Lincoln, which in some respects is helpful, because when I'm coaching people, I don't want to go in with a preconceived notion. They'll say to me, our revenue's down. And I'll say, so why is your revenue down? Now, I could have a preconceived notion as to why their revenue's down if I'd been a vet. But when I've never been one, I ask the question, and then they go, well, and they have to actually work through it. And that process of working through their own challenges and own problems is actually incredibly powerful. Transfer of ownership to individuals, sense of community, bouncing ideas off each other and getting together on a regular basis in a hotel. We make that fun. A feeling of being able to actually transition these skills into actual practice and increase revenue, increase profitability. A lot of people think that veterinarians just make a truckload of money, and some do, and some are a rip-off. But can I tell you, the vast, vast majority, if I told you the average profitability of a veterinary practice was 7% on $1 million of deployed capital, they're making $70,000 a year. Most of them are paying themselves about $70,000 a year as well. So they're pretending that they're making money. They're not at all. They're cheaper to go and be a locum and work somewhere else. But the cost of veterinary practice, I'm not here plugging the veterinary industry, mate, because I know this is going out to farmers, but can I tell you, just hold judgment sometimes, because they charge for their time, always going backwards and forwards to a farm, and they don't make a huge amount of money. The cost, first time I walked into a veterinary practice, ask your vet to go out the back, have a look at what's out there. You could run an ED department with what they've got, same equipment. Dogs and humans, it's the same stuff. And there's no Medicare, there's no external funding. So helping practice owners, real owners, not some middle manager, actually make some money for the first time in their lives, take some stress out of their lives, is hugely rewarding for us.
I mean, it's a really important industry, to say the least, and the impact that you have is really significant. I think there are very much similarities there, Paul, that vets, perhaps like farmers, are very technically trained, and a lot of the training that exists for them is technical in nature. I think, like what we do in farming, as you do in vet, I think teaching the leaders of these businesses management, leadership, finance, strategy, influence, communication, all those skills, just so valuable and so important. And as you say, to create that community is significant. We're delighted to have Lincoln Institute back with us at our September deep dive conference with our members to teach 2 days on management and leadership, Paul. So we can't wait to have you back involved, and we greatly value your contribution to teaching leadership to our farmers. Always compelling. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Hutch. I'm looking forward to it. It's great.
And in addition, over the last 12 months, the FOA team has gone through your Emerging Leaders program. And in addition to what you talk about, the way you teach it and the way that you have our whole team go through it so that we learn together and apply together, it really has helped us bring our team together and strengthen our culture. And to have every member of our team learning those key constructs around communication and respect, accountability, and how to have the tough conversations and all of those really important management constructs has just been so valuable for the FOA team. So, yeah, really enjoying going through that. And the way that you've designed the way you teach the Emerging Leaders program, I think is really clever.
Yeah, look, it didn't start off that way, can I tell you? First time was me talking for an hour at people live. I remember the first time I had a little studio producer. It was hilarious. It was in my back bedroom, and a guy would come in, and he was a bit of a tech head, and he'd set it all up, a bit like you, Hutch. He'd set it all up, and we'd get into it, and there was like 1,500 people live. And then I got the feedback actually from New Zealanders. They're great for feedback. And they just said, Paul, could you shut up for long enough for us to have a chat ourselves about it? We've only got an hour. We have to listen to you for the entire hour. So I thought that was good feedback. So I reduced it to half an hour. So there's less content. It's harder to actually produce less content. Then it was probably COVID, I reckon. So it was a few years ago now where we just cut it back even more. People said, we don't have half an hour. Could you just cut it back into bite-sized pieces? So that's why we have that little intro video, which kind of is the overview. Like, is this of any interest to you? Here's what we're going to randomly cover over the next 3 videos. It goes for 5 or 6 minutes. That's all you have to listen to or watch or whatever. And then the other 3 videos. So chunking it down like that meant that, in a team meeting where if they're under the pump, they want to just keep a little bit going. They can just drop one video in, and one person's responsible for kind of keeping an eye on what the content is and going, that would really work for us right now or whatever. And then they maintain a library of that. So there's 96 videos over 2 years. So that sort of Netflix style, you can jump back in and pick a video that might resonate.
You mind just explaining the Emerging Leaders program to our listeners?
Sure. So Emerging Leaders actually was a market-driven program. I didn't design it initially. I wanted to work with teams, and I used to work with teams, and I had a young family then, or a youngish family. So I'd fly interstate every week, meet with a veterinary practice, stand in front of 20 people, talking to them, and it was very unleveraged. That's very expensive to get me in, flights and accommodation and all the rest of it. And a lot of the practice is quite remote. So I just decided to put it online video, and I thought, how do you make that compelling? So standing in front of people is a very different proposition, getting the feedback from the audience. So I knew there were 24 or between 18 and 24 topics, depending on how much detail you want to get into, essentially core leadership skills that need to be learned at an upskilling level, and then they need to be practiced. So I thought, well, if we delivered one a month, that's enough time for the practice or the farm or whatever to actually have that as a bit of a theme for the month. And so you get the skills and then you just apply them throughout that month. And you can watch it for an hour, watch all 4 videos, have a chat about it. It's done and dusted in 60 minutes. Or you could watch one video a week if you wanted to and string it out that way and just have a little 15, 20-minute session. A videos only get 5 or 6 minutes. There's a worksheet attached to it. There's a quiz questions attached, probably less relevant to your audience, but for veterinarians, the continuing professional development is important for them to maintain their compliance. So there's a quiz question that they got to answer. When they did that, they get a CPD certificate. It's accredited across the United States with 54 industry boards across their veterinary boards. And actually, it's about to be approved by Southern Cross University as a university certificate in non-clinical studies. So Leading Edge is another program purely for vets. Consult room, how to work effectively in the consult room. That program is now approved by SCU and is now up and running. So people get a university certificate course as a result of attending it. But Emerging Leaders is it sits in a cascading way. It's the third course. So the top course is, I won't bore you with the names, but we've got a top course which is practice owners and practice managers, and farm owners, farm managers, a little bit like what you guys are doing at farm owners. So not appropriate to your audience because it's very, very veterinary specific. Next level down is a 4-day intensive program, and that's for middle managers. And then the next level down is emerging leaders, which is the one you're referring to, which is the whole team. Same skills, just a different conversation. If I'm talking to a middle manager, for example, they need to know how to hold their boss accountable in the same way as they need to be able to hold their team members accountable. So kind of it's the meat and the sandwich. If we're talking to the practice owners, they're probably more interested in the hiring. Team members aren't that interested in how to recruit somebody, but they do need to understand that people have 4 competencies, really. They have skill and knowledge, which you can teach, and then they have attitude and aptitude. Attitude is nice person. Aptitude is capable of doing what they're doing. So a lot of people buy nice people who are useless, or they buy useless in the role, I should say, or they hire people who are unbelievably technically competent, nightmare to work with. So what we focus on, for example, in the recruitment learnings would be attitude and aptitude, and how do you pick it? Because if you're not looking for it, you won't find it. So when you go into an interview, you've got to have it written down what you want. You want good judgment. I want good eye contact. I want to hear them being able to articulate themselves clearly. I want to hear that they've got experience in making decisions effectively, even if it's not necessarily the right decision, at least they're making a decision. So we don't end up with indecision, which is worse. So those things are attitude and aptitude based. Can teach everything else. I learned that actually, just a quick side story. I learned that, I think, because all the stuff that we teach, I've just learned over the years and done a bit more research and stuff just to kind of add some meat to the bones, and get the research in there. But I was hired for Aldi Foods, the German supermarket, way back in the day. So this is 1999, before it even opened. It was just myself and Michael Klutis, who was a German managing director. He interviewed me, said, this is the role we're looking for. And I said, no, I'm not interested, Michael. And because it was a supermarket. And I'm not going to pretend to get animated around a supermarket. I just can't. I go into a supermarket, can't get out of there fast enough. I don't mind hardware. Bunnings is great. But I could spend an hour wandering around there, but supermarkets, no. Anyway, so he said, because I wasn't allowed to know what it was when I went in for the interview, just finished in the army. And he was really surprised. He looked at me and said, okay. I walked out. The recruiter said, how'd it go? I said, no. And they said, well, you said no. And I said, yeah, I don't want to work for a supermarket chain. And I didn't know that's what the interview was for when I went in. Anyway, I came out of that. And 3 weeks later, I got a phone call to say, could I have another meeting with him? And he hired me on the basis that I was honest. I could negotiate. I wouldn't take a bribe. I'd just come out of southern Lebanon and Damascus and Syria and the Golan Heights. So I had some time up under my sleeves negotiating, and happens to be a lot of the landowners in Western Sydney where we were buying land. So I kind of had to be able to negotiate at that level. So that's where I learnt those skills, and then they've been applied into emerging leaders when we think about when we're recruiting somebody. So it's all very, very practical stuff. It's not.
Paul, how do you reflect on where you learned leadership and how it was taught to you, I think, in the Defence Force?
A lot of it's learned just purely through practice. So Duntroon's 4 years long, and there's a hierarchy within Duntroon at a cadet level. So you come in and you're basically you're the lowest is slightly below an amoeba for the first 12 months, and then you kind of work your way sort of up over the 4 years. So you're learning amongst each other as a community of cadets, 300 or 400 cadets, making mistakes. You're in charge of people, and you get tested the whole way. Often the testing is not, you don't really know you're being tested. I remember I was in the jungle up in Canungra, just west of the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast. And it's a jungle warfare training centre. It's 3 weeks in there, and it's pretty intense as a testing phase. I had the map and the compass, which meant I was in charge for 24 hours. And I remember going on a patrol. I had 25 of my own fellow cadets who were kind of playing soldiers, right? So, but I'm the guy in charge, and they rotated through different phases of war. So mine was the day-long patrol through the jungle. You only get about 1 kilometre, 2 kilometres, because you got to cut your way through. It's very thick. Sometimes it's full canopy and it's a bit more open, but otherwise it's just really dense. And got to our night lock about 4 p.m, set up the night lock. I just crawled into my sleeping bag and started, it was dark by then anyway, started writing my orders. It was a dawn attack in a position about 200 metres away. I figured I knew where I was on the map. I actually was pretty close. I knew where the target was. Next morning, got up, delivered that evening, delivered my orders. And I didn't know that behind me was a regimental sergeant major and the commanding officer of the JWC, Jungle Warfare Centre. And because you can't see them, it's pitch dark, and they're just hiding and watching you. Next morning, got up into the attack. Everyone died. I killed everybody. I don't think I had a surviving soldier at the end of it. But then when they had the debrief, they said, don't beat yourself up. The orders were fantastic. And what we wanted good, clear orders to be delivered. That was the objective. You didn't know it was going to be booby trapped and all the rest of it. That's just a bit of fun at the end. The main thing was how you're communicating your messages. So I think it's a lot of that hands-on, like really hands-on stuff. I learned resilience from, not eating for a week and carrying heavy loads and having to lean on your mates and observing them. And then, of course, the whole thing is structured within examinations. And I'm a very practical person. I'm not sure I could have gone to uni and learned all of that stuff. In fact, I did an MBA later on in life, and I picked up some extra bits and pieces there, but the vast majority of it was cut when I was a kid, just in that environment. And then, of course, you get it in the battalion, and it's a baptism by fire, because it's just, you're 23, pretty green. You go in and you learn very quickly the art of deference, which we teach on the course. And the art of deference is, if you've got a sergeant or even a corporal who's beneath you in rank, but way above you in terms of experience, most of them are 10 years older than you, and you can't learn to treat them with respect, ask their opinion on something, still hold the responsibility to make the final call. You're getting paid more and you're the officer, but that deferential treatment of senior ranks, I think, carried me a long way. Yeah. I'm not sure whether that exists on a farm, but you get some young pup comes in and just thinks they're going to throw their weight around. And I saw some young platoon commanders do that, and they got eaten alive. These guys are way too experienced. They just, yeah.
Well, I think it does happen in a farming context when you bring in contractors, or when you do employ experienced people who might be more senior than you in age, but also within a family, between sons and daughters, in-laws and outlaws coming back to the family farm and learning to work with and show appropriate levels of respect for the older generation, perhaps. I think it's completely relevant. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, Paul, a lot of our farmers have had a really challenging year. So in the southeast of South Australia, a 1 in 100 dry period. So they're dealing with multiple decisions and probably feeling a reasonable amount of stress and pressure and overwhelm. I can only imagine that in your military years that you were sort of in environments and situations of high pressure. How does your psychology change, and how do you stay resilient in your leadership in the heat of battle when the pressure's on?
Look, if I'm totally honest, sometimes doesn't. Like it probably does in the movies. But there are trigger moments where, well, here's a really good example, right? I remember being on a live fire exercise, and live fire is very, very intense because there's bullets flying everywhere. Everyone's got their left and right of arc. They know where they're allowed to shoot the weapon. There's instructors following fairly closely to make sure you're not going crazy with your weapon, but there are people running in front of you, shooting past and over their head. And I remember just completely losing it in that really stressful situation. And I tried to sort of maintain my composure, but my signaller, who was running along with me, a signaller carries your radio and basically keeps the radio jammed in your ear for artillery and escort and everything else you need to hear. Plus, you've got to send radio transmissions out. And it's so loud, you can't, if someone was standing next to you screaming at you, unless they're screaming into your ear, you won't hear them because it's just the gunfire so loud. And that's something that I'd never experienced. So that I found that quite unsettling the first time hearing how loud that was. But once I'd heard it once, then I was okay with it. But I do remember my signaller ran up to me and I just dived into a ditch to get into some defilade ground, and my signaller grabbed me by the shirt. Now, my signaller is a private soldier, so I'm a lieutenant, so we're a few ranks apart. He's probably about my age or a bit older, so I was like 24, 25. I reckon he would have been about maybe 30. And he grabbed me on the shoulder, my epaulette, where my rank is, and he said, "Boss, calm down." And I've never forgotten it. It was an amazing sort of learning for me to acknowledge the fact that he felt confident to be able to say that to me, which was great. And when I reflect on that, that was a very important part of that. but also just that arm on the shoulder, and I guess this is where team resilience comes in. Like if you want to set yourself up for failure, think you're a hero, go out there and try and do it on your own, and you won't. So I would be reaching for my community like crazy. I'd be getting on the phone, talking to people, get things off your chest. We didn't do enough of that in Lebanon. My first day in Lebanon, just seeing all these things that I'm not even going to prepare to repeat now, and just thinking, we never had a debrief process, but the moment we did debrief and we had a bit of a laugh, not about what we'd seen, but laugh about other stuff, and that for me was massively cathartic. So I would say anyone's going through stress, there is things you can do yourself. Firstly, number one, you've got to not necessarily get a grip of yourself, because I don't think that's particularly helpful. But what you can, those words aren't particularly helpful. What you can do is get a grip to the extent that you pick up the phone and actually ask for help. That is so important. And I think people try and be too stoic, and they can't. In a battalion, as a young officer, you have a platoon sergeant, your 2IC, and becomes your best mate, I tell you, in the sense of, he's still got to do what he's told and you're still the boss. But who's your 2IC? If I was on a farm, I'd want a 2IC, and that 2IC's got to be the person you turn to who is, checking up on you. And often I find as the leader, there's this thing called pro-sociality. I didn't know it was called that, but there's this thing called, when you do something for someone else, you feel good about yourself. And so putting yourself in a position where you can do something good for somebody else is an incredibly powerful way to be of service to somebody. Is very, very powerful. I mean, we used to do stuff like, and again, I didn't explain this very well in the army, but we had to clean our boots every night. We had to shave every day. And you wipe off the cam paint. You go, why am I shaving? And you put the cam paint back on again. And the whole idea is to have that sort of those routines that mean that every day I get that polished boots, or, the old making the bed. That's a classic. Why do army people make their beds? And it's because, and there's a good TED talk on this from some Marine general. If you don't make your bed, you can't do the bigger things. And honestly, they are so simple. They're the little tiny things that you can do to maintain a sense of composure or a sense of normality under pressure. And sometimes as the leader, you get it completely wrong. Like I remember I was in Hawaii working with the Marines. We're going up the Kukus for a week. The Kahuku mountain range is, if you drive on the west coast, there's a kind of surf on the left and the mountain range on the right. The only way in, it's these spur lines that are like 700-800 meters high. The only way in is by helicopter, by Black Hawk, and they rappel you through the canopy. You've got to drop through the canopy. Now, it's not that high when you're above the canopy, but the canopy is 100 foot off the ground. So you're kind of 100 foot off the ground, but the canopy, you're only 10 foot, if that makes sense, like 10 or 20 feet. So it doesn't feel that bad on deployment. But in the training, take a Black Hawk helicopter under 100 feet above the ground and start jumping out of it, just sliding down the ropes. It's terrifying. One of the things that I learned about my own personal resilience level was when I was in charge, I was actually fine. I could kind of get over that mental, psychological, emotional hurdle of this, because I don't like heights, but I could get over that feeling of, I'm afraid, I don't think I can do this, when I was leading other people. But what I failed to do was empathize with my soldiers who weren't in that situation, who were being told to do it. And, there's an element of just do what you're told in the army, but there's almost an element of F off if you don't want to do it. Like soldiers will tell you. And I went up with poor old Brownie, Private Brown. He's probably a farmer, successful farmer now listening to this podcast, but he'll know who he is. And 1989 in the Kahuku Ranges. And he couldn't jump. He couldn't go out the Black Hawk. So I went up with him to try and attempt to help him out. And it got all very nasty up the top and he got sick and we came down. He ended up redeploying back to Australia and eventually discharging. But I felt really bad about that from a leadership perspective. It's a bit of a segue from the question you asked, but I felt bad that I hadn't kind of set him up for success. I hadn't kind of, let's just do 10 foot, then let's do 20 foot, let's jump off the side of the building, relatively straightforward. Then we'll maybe bring the helicopters in. We just went straight gung ho. So, in that context, I feel like if there's scope to help your teams get to the point where maybe you've got to as a leader, because you don't have any choice. Not everybody's following you at that point. I've sort of gone off topic a bit there, Hutch, but don't be hard to follow. I think it's a very, very important lesson that I learned in my military career and subsequently.
You've talked about deference and respect, and you've talked about the rituals that can help you stay composed. And now you've just talked about having empathy. What is your take on leadership and some of the skills that define it?
I think the very, very top of the pile would have to be self-awareness, which is really hard to do because you think you come across in a particular way and your intent is X, or whatever. And in fact, your impact is often nothing like that. And the reason why your impact or why things don't land as simply as you think they will is because of so many things. Daniel Kahneman talks about fast brain, slow brain. If I'm sitting in front of a group of farmers or a group of whoever, soldiers, and I say something to those soldiers, every single person in the room will take it slightly differently depending on where their mindset is. They'll either say, oh, there's another example of him, making out that we all need to lift our game. I know he's talking to me, why doesn't he just have the conversation with me directly? Now, you're in no control over that as the leader. So being very, very mindful as to how you're coming across is hard, but I think that's a great place to start. There's an expression in the military called withdraw to ground of your own choosing. If I was going to go into a difficult situation, I would never just go in without setting myself up first before I went in. And if someone was to catch me out and I was off guard or thrown, maybe I got a bit triggered, I can feel it coming. For me, it's kind of like that rumbling in the stomach or that sort of tightening of the chest and I'm just about to snap or I'm about to lose it. That is never a good result. So being self-aware enough to know I'm not going to be my best self right now, what outcome I'm looking for, is really important. Being able to recognize that early and then do something about it. I think that's part of self-awareness. And often if someone was to, for example, say, Paul, I need to talk to you, I'm really upset about X, I would say, look, let me just put my stuff down. And then I might take a few deep breaths and go, where's this coming from? I might even speak to some people. Then I might go and have a chat to that person and say, look, you just need to give me 10 minutes and I'm all yours, right? I'll be all ears. But don't get caught in the killing ground. If you walk into an ambush in the military and the infantry, first thing you do is you've got to get out, right? Because they're already set up. They're primed to kill you, right? They've got everything set up, designed to get you in the killing ground. So it's a bit of a macabre metaphor, but you've got to get out of there. And so let's say, for example, you and I are having a conversation, Hutch, and it all started to go a bit south and I could see your arms folding and you're getting all defense. I'd say, look, let's draw a line under this now. Let's pick this up again a bit later on. We've both got a bit of stuff to do. You've given me some amazing things to think about, Hutch. I'd like to take away those things and pay them due respect. That's me being self-aware enough to know that if I just continue, this is all going to go to hell in the handbasket. So self-awareness, I think, is very important. I think empathy is really important. Understanding how other people might perceive you, what's going on in their life that might not mean that they're their best selves. And I've always been a huge fan in leadership of holding up a mirror, because there's this wonderful little acronym called FAT, right? Which is, it's a fallacy that people wake up in the morning to be belligerent. The assumption needs to be, and this is the A, the assumption needs to be that they're trying their hardest. Otherwise, why are you still employing them, right? So that's, and then the truth is that if they're not meeting my expectations, it's probably because I haven't been clear enough. That's when you're just going to have tough conversations. And they're not hard if you just set it up nice and early. In the discussion, if I was hiring someone, I'd say, mate, welcome aboard. Love to have you. We got an induction period. It's going to go for a couple of weeks. We're going to get you on board properly. Let me tell you the 5 things that are going to really trigger me, going to piss me off. And I would outline them, set that expectation before anyone's committed any crimes. No one's feeling awkward. It's just a really easy conversation because, of course, the person's going, well, I'd never do that. You say, okay, cool. So you're okay if I call you out and you call me out if that happens. I mean, that's just the start of a wonderful working relationship with somebody. That means you're never gonna be in that really awkward situation. So, yeah, self-awareness, hold up a mirror, have some empathy for other people. They won't always be in a good place. And I think also go hard, go early is a big one for me. And what I mean by that is, if on your property there are certain things that you value, I put money on the fact that there will be senior people listening to this podcast who work on a property who go, you know what? There's some things where I just draw the line. I will not stand for this. I won't stand for that. Laziness, turning up late, not getting on with the job. You got a problem, say you got a problem. Don't pretend to do something and then cover it up, whatever, right? So whatever your list is, they become really your values. It's how you choose to live your life, and it's how you choose to operate a farm. Then what I would do is I'd talk about those things, and I'd say, well, here's the list, whatever the list is. Never try and cover anything up. Be honest and just tell me as it is. Now, there's a perfect value right there in that sentence. And then you'd say, okay, so what does that look like for you as a farmhand? What does it look like for me as an owner? Let's talk about it. No one's done it, which is great. And the reason why they're not doing it is because we train it. We're constantly having these conversations, which are really around behavior. And most people, I would imagine, same as in veterinary practice, it's not so much the technical stuff that catches people out. It's the freaking annoying behavior that drives everybody crazy. And it's that interactions with people. So I think if you can go hard, go early on some of this stuff and say, every week, I want to talk about a new value. Another value of mine is whatever, right? And I want to talk about it. And I want you to share with me what frustrates you. And I'm going to share with you what frustrates me. And we're going to have that conversation way before anyone commits any crimes. And then I can say, then if it does play out, we can talk about it really openly because we've actually trained on it. People don't train enough, Hutch. They don't train enough.
It's gold, Paul. We advocate weekly meetings and quarterly meetings and annual planning meetings with our members, and we hold them accountable to those. Bringing a value conversation into each of those discussions, I think, is just critical to continue to reinforce the standard and continue to sort of have those conversations that you talk about ahead of time.
Yeah, like a lot of practices, and I don't know whether farms are the same, but a lot of practices will have their values poster out on reception. And it's been done beautifully calligraphied and all that sort of stuff. And that's fine, but it's pretty useless. I mean, when was the last time you read a COVID sign? You just don't read them anymore. Just walk straight past them. Doesn't matter where you hang them on the back of the toilet door, people have stopped reading them. And so for me, I'd say ditch that. Get a piece of butcher's paper. It's cheap as chips. Get some blue tack. Write in the middle of it what you think is important to you, which is be honest, don't make stuff up. People die when you do that. Write that in the middle of the piece of paper. And then on a Post-it note, get every single team member to write down how that manifests. So you can't Google that. I don't care. Like, you want to write honesty, fine, but you Google honesty. Any monkey can do that. I don't need a Google definition of honesty. I want to know what honesty means to you as the farm owner, as the farm hand. And what's an example of honesty from last week? Write on a Post-it note. And if it's got spelling errors in it, it's even better because you wrote it. And now what I can do is I can sit down with you and say, how are we going? Are we winning or losing? Let's grab the butcher's paper, put it on the table. Let's go through these Post-it notes and say, let's think of some prime examples. And I always think as a leader, it's important if anyone's going to fall on their sword, it's got to be you. So you might have to say, look, I don't think I was completely honest with the team last week. I tried to cover up the fact that we weren't going to get the muster in on time, or we weren't going to do whatever. Trying to make you feel better. I don't think it made anyone feel better. Just stressed the hell out of me and my wife or whatever. And I think you were capable of hearing the message. And I should have told you. I should have been more upfront with you. And so something like that would be just such a wonderful conversation. So powerful. And that's what Emerging Leaders does. It starts a new conversation every month about stuff that really matters, that's super practical, that strikes at the heart of the things that will frustrate people most, which is behavior. Yeah.
It's brilliant, Paul. And these are called the softer skills, aren't they? We don't.
Yeah, well, you know where that comes from, don't you? Soft skills. So it came when they were coming up with all this stuff. Back in the military came up with it. Right, that's where the expression comes from. I think it's like the 1800s or something. And soft skills was everything that didn't involve a bullet or a tank or a piece of artillery. Literally, anything else was soft. That was all the hard skills. How do you strip and assemble a weapon? How do you fire at a target? How do you fire a tank? Like, they were the hard skills, and the soft skills was all the people stuff. And so what's happened is HR type people have gotten hold of it and they've applied it to stuff that doesn't matter, which is hilarious. Because if you think about a soldier in combat, okay, the weapon can jam occasionally, but 99% of his focus is, how do I keep my head in a good place? How do I stay focused? How do I remember what my orders are under pressure like this? How do I stay awake all night and stay compass the next day? Yeah, they call them soft. Anyone who calls them soft skills in a disparaging way, Hutch, has never done it. That's what I reckon.
As you reflect, Paul, how much of the leadership training that you've picked up in the Defence Force and taught in the Defence Force, how well does it apply across to business and business teams?
It all applies. I actually haven't found anything that doesn't. I mean, obviously there's tactical things like, how do you fire and move through the bush, and how do you clear a building? But in terms of, back to the soft skills, but in terms of the behavioral stuff, it's completely applicable. And, and people sometimes say, oh, in the army, everyone just does what they're told and it's easy. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's not like that at all. You've got warrant officers who want to take young officers around the back of the building and give them a belting. You've got soldiers who will just turn to you and just tell you to F off. I had a section commander who leapt across my desk at me, and he was only stopped because I called out some bad behaviour, and he later went to jail for it. But he and my platoon sergeant was standing next to me, and he leapt across the desk and tackled this guy. We all three of us played rugby together. We were actually, on the field, there was no rank. But I tell you, off the field, I called him out on some behaviour. He literally threw himself at me. He's a big unit too. He's a front rower. Luckily, my sergeant was there to tackle him, made a bit of a mess at the desk, and he was arrested. And he actually went off to civilian jail. I don't know how many years he got, but it's pretty bad what he'd been accused of, and he was later found guilty of it. All applies. There isn't a single thing. It's just the examples are different.
Thanks, Paul. So one thing I wanted to talk about, and looping back to the Black Hawk example, perhaps, there's new legislation, work health safety, that requires us now as employers to create a safe workplace. Now, that is more than just physically safe. It's also psychological safety as well. Would you mind speaking to that in a vet practice and maybe in a farming context, and what that means for us?
Sure. The way this has come from is, as you say, the WHS laws came in 2011, the Commonwealth law around workplace health and safety, largely around physical stuff, spills and chemical spills and all that sort of stuff, heavy plant equipment, training. There's been a huge amount of emphasis on that over the years. But in the last few years, something's changed, maybe because of COVID, I don't know, but there's been a shift in focus. The state bodies are responsible for administering and monitoring and regulating that Commonwealth law. Victoria took ages for them to kind of get on board with it, but they eventually did. And so now you've got work safe and safe work, and depends which state you're in. Those state bodies have shifted their posture in the last 2 years away from one of, hey, listen, it'd be really nice if you looked after your team and everyone knew what their job was and you had a position description, to one of starting to prosecute. And a couple of cases that I was watching in Sydney, one was sexual harassment in the workplace for hoteliers, where restaurant chains were literally almost had to close because of women being harassed late at night as waitresses and stuff. And the real standout one for me was the law firm that was closed. It was a big law firm, level 30 of a high rise in Sydney, walked in with a HasVest jacket on, stuck a sign up saying unsafe workplace, and told everybody to go home, as if there was a gas leak. So you can imagine walking around this floor and you've got people doing big things, just being told to pack up their laptop and disappear because you can't work here anymore. I think that law firm was closed for 7 days while they did a thorough investigation. And it was started not by your good employees. It was started by probably the few problematic ones. It's not playing down the issue, but that's brought in new regulations around providing a safe workplace for lawyers now. And so, there's all these hour restrictions and you can't keep people there till late at night. Now you can, but you've got to pay them exorbitant amounts of money. So it's kind of trying to stop all of that stuff taking place. So there's been this sort of shift in posture towards, not only is it about the physical, but now it's about the psychological safety of people. Now, psychological safety doesn't mean wrap them in cotton wool. It doesn't mean that they can't be uncomfortable. It just means they have to be safe. And so what does that look like? The regulators came out and said, okay, this is how we're going to do it. Everyone's going to maintain a register. So veterinary hospitals are encouraged to do this. We encourage them to do it. If they don't do it, then they're at risk. And that is, you've got to identify what's the hazard, number one. Number two, the risk. Number three, your control measure. And number four, how do you monitor it? So best example would be, give you a physical one. In a vet hospital, there are certain drugs that will kill you if you take them, right? Horse tranquilizer, for example. So hazard is the drug itself. The risk gets into the wrong hands. People can take their own lives with it really easily. You just have to take a couple of mils. I actually don't know the dosage, but it doesn't take much. So that's the risk, is it gets in the wrong hands. the control measure is put in a safe. And it goes beyond that, that if you declare you have a mental health issue and you have a key to the safe key is changed or the code's changed, or you get the key taken off you as a veterinarian. And then most practices have that kind of as a standard thing. And then the check-in process is they change the safe code every month or whatever, just kind of stay on top of it. So that's a classic physical one. In terms of a psychological one, it would be, what's the hazard? Remote working, right? So you're out in the paddock. No, that's physical. So let's stick with mental. You're working remotely and there's a drought and the hazard is isolation. The risk is you've got no one to talk to, the bank's on the phone, and there's a risk that you could harm yourself. The control measure you have around that is a regular community forum catch up where you air the issues, Farm Owners Academy. The check-in is the fact that you're constantly doing that. So it's you've got an alumni where you're just constantly checking in with people, maybe a buddy system or something where you're kind of connecting with each other. Haven't heard from Hutch for a week or so now. I'm just going to pick up the phone and check with him. But it's structured. Now, in a veterinary hospital, there's a whole stack of hazards. So they've got about 20 hazards. The worst one, it's not so much in a veterinary hospital, but the worst one is people don't know what they're meant to be doing. That's a psychological hazard. The risk is that they're made to feel like an idiot. Their job is now at risk financially, and they're wondering whether or not they're going to be able to pay their rent. So nothing to do with physical. It's all in the head. The control measure is a position description, properly articulated position description, so that everyone's super clear and it's communicated properly and sit down and go through them with it, like a proper induction process, right? And then the control measure is a regular review, like a sit down with your boss every 6 months and have a chat about how your performance is going. So emerging leaders has been kind of positioned now, I think, as ticking a lot of boxes in this regard, because I've gone through and listed all of the hazards in a veterinary practice, and a lot of the risks that are associated with that are burnout and mental health breakdown, like psychological breakdown. So they're the risks. They all point to the same thing psychologically, or in many respects. So the control measure is that we do training on it. And we sit down and we actually talk about it, and these topics get raised, and there's an opportunity for people to air any concerns that they have, and it's a safe place where people can just sit and talk about stuff. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but you don't get to grow in a comfortable way. You got to get uncomfortable in order for you to be able to grow, and so that's where emerging leaders sort of fits into that, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Paul. I think what that speaks to for me is, yes, as farm owners, we're responsible for the result that we get on the farm and how that provides for our family, but at least as much we're responsible for the well-being, safe and psychological well-being of the people that we enroll in our teams on farm. And that's a leadership responsibility that we need to take very seriously.
It is. And look, there's a lot of flack about D&I at the moment, with what's happening in America, and a lot of the DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion programs being cancelled by the US government. I don't think it's a bad thing, to be honest. There's a lot of these programs just very performative. They're just ridiculous. DEI, diversity, means that people think differently, and you should embrace it. If you don't embrace it, you're an idiot, because there will be young people who have better ideas than you, fresh ideas. You've been staring at the problem too long. You can't even see the wood for the trees. So diversity, whether you like it or not, everyone comes from a different background. Everyone's got different levels of experience, different education levels. So that's the diversity. Equity. Why would you not want to give everyone a fair crack at something? Some people, don't have access to education. Some people, and this is what I love about Southern Cross University. They're not a brownstone university where you got to get 99.99 recurring to get in. They're actually going out to the country and they're saying, who are the kids out there who have been doing distance education, who are really smart, who are really capable of actually passing a veterinary degree if they actually have access to the right information? So I think that's a really equitable, I'm not talking about equality. Of course, we're not equal. We're all born different. But from an equity point of view, it's fair. Everyone has a fair crack at things. And then from an inclusion perspective, why would you not want to include people in the process? Like, this is just really basic common sense. If I go back to my hardest days as an infantry officer, DEI sat at the center of what we do. Like, why would you have someone feeling like they're on the outer? Either get rid of them if you don't like them, or bring them in. But so for me, DEI is one of these things where it's pure common sense. As a leader, unfortunately, it's got a lot of brand damage because there's a lot of stuff going on that I think is just confusing people, and some things I think probably taken too far or not far enough. I don't know why I started talking about that, but welcome to my brain, Hutch.
2 more questions, if I could, Paul. You mentioned we don't train enough, and I'm going to extend that probably to include we don't communicate within our teams enough. Would you mind just speaking to that? What's better if I'm a technical bloke on farm or husband and wife team, really having sit down professional conversations with the team that we employ? What's best practice?
Well, for me, there's a sort of transition period where people go from here's the instructional phase. So here's what you need to learn about being on this farm, and you've got a proper induction, which is documented so you don't miss anything. In the military, we used to have a 4-week induction into the battalion, and on page 1 was a list of things you needed to learn, who could teach them, in a tick box whether you'd been taught them or not. Now, in your farm, some things need to be taught by the owner and some things don't. Some things could be handled by someone else. And then at the end of Friday, you say, how are you going with your list? Let's have a look at it. What's missing on your list? Okay, let's cover those off in the next 30 minutes. We can quickly talk about those. And then here's your sheet for next week. So that's an induction. It's an instructional phase. It's where people really learn the ropes. But then we've got to make a transition. Now, I refer to it as flick the switch. You've got to flick the switch and stop thinking that this person's going to get any better by you continuing to tell them what to do, because they won't. You've actually got to put them in harm's way, and you've got to say, you have a crack. Now, when they come back at you and ask you questions, you say, I think you know this. We've talked about this. And that's when you've got to get into coaching. So transitioning from telling to coaching or instructing to coaching is such an important transition. So when someone comes up and says, I don't know how to do X, I'd say, so how much do you know? And then just shut up and let them answer the question. I want to talk about, a particular topic on the farm. We're in a team meeting. I'd say, righto, leaders need to learn to speak last. Just shut up, because as soon as you open your mouth, everybody just follows exactly what you said. Now, there are some situations where that's really important. You do that because it's a crisis and I've got more information than you do. So just do what you're told and let's get going on this. But you've got to have this sort of, I think it's important to develop a mindset of, or an understanding that you're actually not helping things if you're actually just continuing to micromanage or helicopter parent this person who is actually probably more capable than you think they are. It's a bit like taking your kid out to learn to ride a bike and the kid falls off and you say, get off, I'll ride it. It's just ridiculous. You would never do that. And the reason you don't is because you want your kid to learn to ride a bike. Well, if you want your teams to actually own their stuff, hold up a mirror and have a look at how much time you spend mothering people, barking orders at people, as opposed to training them to a certain standard and then saying, now you get on with it. And if you've got any concerns, of course, I'm always here. But you know what I'm going to do when you come to me? I'm going to ask you what you've already thought about, how far you've come with this. I'm going to say, how are you going to find the answer? Like, I'm going to push you to grow and develop rather than just constantly feeling like I need to answer every question.
Thanks, Paul. So we haven't delved deeply into your career in defence. We've touched on it. We haven't spent a lot of time reflecting on your leadership role across corporate Australia. We've touched on the Lincoln Institute, but as you reflect back, can I just ask you one last question? What would be the advice you'd give to a younger you? If you could have a conversation with a 20-year-old Paul, what advice would you give him on leadership?
I think it would be, and I probably didn't give myself this advice, but it's how it played out. It would be, don't be afraid to have a crack at things. And when you do fall over and get back up again, don't forget what knocked you down and try not to do that again. I developed a growth mindset very early on in my days at Duntroon. I mean, something really awful happened to me at Duntroon, like 6 months in or something. I walked in the recreation room and someone threw a pie at the heater and they looked at me and they said, are you on cleaning up duties on Monday? And I said, yes. Or yes, sir, or this corporal, whatever he was. And he's another cadet. I felt really humiliated. I was probably about to cry. How old was I? 19 or something. And I was, you're under a fair bit of pressure. I haven't slept much. I remember walking out after I got his permission to leave the room. He embarrassed me in front of all of these people. The guy that followed me was a guy called Grant Strudwick, who had the highest rank in the company. And I thought, oh my God, does it get any worse? So I walked away, and he called out my name, and I turned and stood to attention in front of him. And he said, I want you to remember two things. Number one, never, ever in your life make anyone feel like you feel right now. So don't you forget how you feel. Soak it up. And number two, if you can't bounce back, you won't graduate. And he just said, off you go. I reckon they were two of the best life lessons, because he was right. It's never left me how he made me feel humiliated in front of a group like that. And you got to learn to bounce back. You got to learn it's what did I take out of that? Everything's a learning. Everything is a learning. And no matter what it is, if your dams are drying up, what do you learn from that? Dig them deeper when you can. Don't mean for that to sound glib or patronizing to your farmers, but if you can, take one little lesson out of it, because cumulatively they really add up. They can really enable you to, or impact you as you sort of keep getting the knocks. Don't be afraid of the knocks. Knocks are good. Knocks teach you what not to do.
Thanks, Paul. So just to finish with a thank you, really excited that we've worked with the Lincoln Institute over the last couple of years to shape emerging leaders so that it's absolutely applicable to agriculture as much as it is to your vet clients. And really excited that we get to offer emerging leaders with you through our Platinum Mastermind and alumni program. So, yeah, really excited that our members and our alumni get to enjoy emerging leaders and go through that program with you. So thank you for partnering with us in that.
No, thank you, Hutch. It's a pleasure, total pleasure.
And Paul, really appreciate your time today. Wonderful to get your insights and your reflections on this really important topic of leadership. Thank you very much.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Paul, and wonderful to connect. On reflection, I really appreciate Paul's comments that leadership starts with self-awareness, underpinned by a deep respect for those in your team and those around you, real empathy, deference, having clear values and standards, and communicating with your team around those often so that they come to life regularly, having those tough conversations around performance early, about communicating more proactively, training more, and importantly, the topic around safety, that well-being and creating a safe and productive farm culture is on us, and it's our responsibility as farm owners. We're delighted at Farm Owners Academy to have the Lincoln Institute teach leadership to our members. And as I mentioned in the intro, we're delighted that our Platinum Mastermind and alumni members have access to their Emerging Leaders program through Farm Owners Academy and our support. Paul, wonderful to connect. Thank you. And we look forward to having you part of our conferences later in the year on this critical conversation around leadership. Take care, everyone. Thank you, and bye for now. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Profitable Farmer podcast by Farm Owners Academy. If you're new to this show, be sure to follow us. If you've been a long-time listener, let your friends know about us, or come continue the conversation in the Profitable Farmer Facebook group. All the best as you grow your business and create your freedom farm. Until next time, keep being incredible.